Yep, yeah, might as well. Well,
Let me put my.
thanks for having me on today and really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of different directions we could go. And like if you've watched any of my other videos on my channel, it's like I mostly have exhausted kind of the main things that I talk about, which is just like basically the business side of publishing, specifically publishing comics and graphic novels.
Yeah,
And at this point, my audience has kind of seen everything I have to offer, the basics of that territory. So those who've stuck with me this long are sort of leveling up or branching out into different categories. And you're a perfect example of someone that I wanted to latch on to where it's like, if those of us who've created certain things, you end up in with a brand associated with your genre. And one of the best ways to really level up in a sense is to sort of become a part of a subculture that expands greater than just the comic book community. So if you're a part of someone I always use the example of skateboarding or the subculture of like dubstep or just like some kind of
yeah,
musical subgenre. And in your case, a lot of the people that I talk to or I'm actually friends with in this field, they one of their subcultures they might consider themselves a part of is the paranormal, uh, sort of into the realms that you're a part of. So occult mysticism, Kabbalistic mysticism, and virtually everything from remote viewing, lucid dreaming, and all this stuff that's now seeming a bit more active. I remember 10 or 20 years ago, these were still sort of fringe. You were really, really weird if you were into this stuff. Now it's kind of the normal weird.
yeah.
So bring us up to speed on sort of yourself as a person and then yourself as an author and then how that relates to maybe the comics you have out and stuff like that.
Sure. Um, I'm really just a small town Midwestern boy. Um, grew up a small town in the Ozarks, but I think that the isolation that I kind of felt, and it was the 80s, we didn't have all of the interconnectivity that we do nowadays. And I felt really isolated from the rest of the world. And I think it's because of that. There were a couple of different things where I felt like I was getting connection with something other than where I was at. And that was either at the grocery store stands where comics were, and that was a whole other like venue of mind expansion for me that I couldn't get anywhere else. But I had a whole woods in my backyard. And my imagination and just like weird, experiences that happen to, I think, most people in childhood. But I really like latched onto those experiences as a very strong, tangible part of my reality. And from there, those two kind of interests have just kind of converged and have always sort of stayed, married to one another. But probably, I think, um, I didn't really lean into the aspect of creating comics just until just a few years ago. I'm pushing 50, and it's something that's always been a passion of mine. I think I just felt like I didn't really know the community. I didn't know my footing in the community. So yeah, I went into being to kind of, documenting my interests and writing about my interests just via through prose and also nonfiction writing. And where I really got my foothold was about 10 years ago. I started getting published as an author under Llewellyn Worldwide, writing about shamanistic practices, psychedelic practices, things like that. Because I always continued those explorations on my own. So I've had a lot of experiences of interacting with indigenous communities, going to Peru and things like that, really trying to kind of figure out like what this is, this thing that we're experiencing called reality. And it wasn't until about 5 or 6 years ago, my wife finally just kicked me in the butt and said, "Dude, you love comics. Will you just start making comics? Like you can pull these all these interests together. It doesn't have to be superhero stuff." And I was like, okay, let's do it. And that's how I kind of entered the indie comics community was just, I'm just going to make what I know, right? And some of the first comics that I made were memoirs about my kind of shamanistic rituals that I've been a part of using psychedelics and exploring consciousness expansion and topics like that. So, yeah, I think that's a pretty decent rundown, maybe.
No, yeah, for sure. I guess number one is are you still in the Ozarks?
Well, I'm in the Kansas City metro area. I'm not in the Ozarks
Okay.
proper,
We're
but
still
my
not far from each other. I'm on the west side of St. Louis, so
oh, okay.
we're
Yeah,
not far
yeah.
from each other. That's cool. Maybe we'll meet up at a con because I was planning on going to some of the Kansas City conventions this year
Oh,
or
that'd be
next
great.
year, I mean.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, man. Would love
Do
that.
you do you do any events or conventions that are related to the Psychonaut sphere or like those subcultures? Like, are there any like UFO conventions or anything like that that you've tried to be a vendor at?
Not yet. So I'm actually looking forward to doing that. I've mostly done comic book conventions, and I don't really feel like I've gotten a strong foothold of interest in the comics community. Just because I think a lot of people are still very interested in kind of like anything Marvel DC related or that's like Marvel and DC or Image Comics and things like that. And although there are some people that really dig my work and I really appreciate that community, but I think as a whole, like when I attend Planet Comic Con, there's a lot of people that are there for the pop culture aspect of the industry and they look at my work and they don't really know what to make of it, you know. But one of the things I'm wanting to do with this crowdfunder that I'm starting is to maybe earn enough funds that I can start attending conventions like that. Because there are some, but you know, that community of either psychedelics as, you know, healing and exploration, or like you say, UFO, paranormal, a lot of those communities are trying to move more and more towards getting expertise. So their focus hasn't been totally on, oh, there's people doing all these other fringe things. Although it's there, it's just that their profile has kind of like they've upped the ante on their profile, right? So it's a little harder to get into those particular conventions, but that's my goal. I want to be able to earn enough funds that I can start doing that and kind of find where these two communities kind of cross the streams.
Yeah,
Just
for sure. No, that's exactly what I wanted to. Maybe we could even like talk it out today, because like for example, in I'm an editor along with a writer, so I work with a lot of different books and titles, and a few of them are under a banner of what you might call fiction that is associated with research in the paranormal stuff. So there's people that, like you, have done research into a specific topic that itself you could sort of be consider yourself an expert on with your nonfiction stuff. And
yeah,
there's a market for that in a certain community, but it's bridging the gap to fiction that's related to that is much tougher, I feel like. Or it's like it's harder to find that market or because like you're saying, if you're going to a Comic-Con, the people's interests of the fiction are more related to superheroes. As soon as you start to tell them like, oh, actually this superhero story is based upon reality, or
yeah,
like my version of reality or an alternate ancient history, and then people are just almost weirded out by it to where they're just
right,
like, well, what are you talking about? The Nephilim giants aren't something that was Marvel invented? You're saying that this is like ancient history? And it's like
right,
you lose them in the weeds, but the people that are into that, it's like they want to know more about the real. They're like, I want you to just translate the ancient text. I don't want to hear your fake story about like some person that may have existed in this realm or even so it's like harder to bridge that gap. I know that people do it though. And there's a lot of us that it's like if we can like figure out like how to take a very researched topic but the fiction aspect of it, and then the even sub niche of the graphic novel aspect of it,
yeah,
So I'm trying to piece together like how to where to sell it, who's reading it, and all that stuff.
Sure. Yeah. I think there are people that have done that, right? I think, Alan Moore, I think is the biggest example, which is funny
Yeah.
because in terms of comics, he's a common name, right? Everybody knows who Alan Moore is and they forget that's exactly what he did. He did
Yeah.
all this fringe stuff and like most of his comics you could read, you're getting like a thesis on magic and world history and philosophy. Grant Morrison, similar. One of my personal favorites, Rick Veitch, with his Swamp Thing run and the other work that he's done. So, I think that those people are out there, but yeah, they're just few and far between. And I definitely, in terms of my interests in comics, I've always leaned more towards their stuff too.
Yeah.
I like all comics. I mean, I appreciate them all, but the things that I really prize on my shelf are those creators that really start kind of peeling back that like veil of reality a little bit and make you feel a little wobbly on your feet, make you feel whether or not whatever you're reading is real, not real, is is your reality,
Yeah,
just
for
a fable
sure.
or not. And so that's the kind of stuff that really interests me.
If he can get it to the level of that's the thing, it's like if you can get to a broad like you yourself as a fiction writer has a huge audience on itself, whether you did it through publishing with major publishers like Grant Morrison and I mean, first of all, they've been doing it for years and years and years. So it's like if you've been in the game for 20, 30, 40 years, and then if you've published with all the major publishers, then it's almost like your own audience is who's the more in tune with what you're actually saying underneath to where your stories you can tell kind of whatever you want. It's harder for us sort of at the very low level with indies where it's like you're just trying to find any audience
Yeah.
and then so to sort of grasp onto them it's like I'm trying to target sort of my niche audience. So it's but even those that are more mainstream, I think a good example was Graham Hancock
Mm.
is known for his research books or whatever, Magicians of the Gods, and but he's also written fiction.
Yeah.
Um, and those, even as well known as he is, I know that like he struggles to sell the fiction stories. Not necessarily struggles like indie comic struggles, but just compared to, the success of the nonfiction, it is just kind of like even when you have an audience, your own audience might really like you as an author, but they're just not there to read your fiction. They
Yeah.
want to read the nonfiction and, really dive into the down the rabbit hole of something. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, I had that I wouldn't say issue, but that conversation with Llewellyn Worldwide because they were publishing my nonfiction works and I just felt like, what makes Alan Moore so magical is to be able to deliver this information in a fictional way, you're pulling more onto the audience's imagination rather than just their thinking capacity. And then as a result, the creative work that you're doing is working more like a magic spell
mhm.
rather than just like, okay, here's a diction of like, you can read this on Wikipedia basically,
Yeah,
or just any other like video on YouTube or something. But they just that, like to your point, they would always say it's a great idea, but it's just the market isn't there yet, so, we got to keep working on that, and you're going to have to keep working on that from an underground angle. So, that's fine. I'll keep some of the greatest, cartoonists and writers, I think, kind of came from that underground angle, like Philip K. Dick, Robert Crumb, these people, just started at that underground, matrix. And I think I think that's where, kind of we're at right now with where the internet has gotten and so many aspects of it have gotten mainstream. But there still
hmm
is this underground current that has a lot of power. We just got to find a way to kind of generate that power, tap into the right people and build a community around it, and that's something I'm very interested in is the next step of all this is okay, finding that niche of a niche audience and then building a community out of it that can actually grow and build more creators and build more readers and etc. So that's a big interest of mine.
Yeah, no, to back up to that paradox you're talking about, that of these sort of fringe ideas, or subjects, it is interesting how they really don't capture the broad audience except through fiction. Like that's where it really like drills into the psyche or whatever. No matter how much people might research or read or something, it doesn't really hit us on a more emotional scale until it's associated with something like this, the storytelling of it, rather than just like absorbing the information. It's like you need to feel the story of the characters that are just in a realm of where these kind of paranormal things might exist, and that's what really captures a broad audience. But uh, it's just like, but how do you? I guess maybe that is the catch 22 of this all, is like you just have to do great writing or something, or like
Yeah.
really just like capture the audience. It's like it doesn't matter how much of this little marketing ploys and gimmicks that we might try, or trying to find my market or whatever. It just, well, all that really matters is how good is your story.
Yeah. Yeah. That's just a dart on the dartboard kind of thing. I mean, it's just the social media angle, algorithms, all that's always going to change. It's just, finding people that, want to create stuff and that just keep creating that. So no matter what, I'm going to keep making what I make. It drives me, and it pulls me. One thing that came to mind as you were speaking, the best scientific book I ever read in my life was from a mathematical cosmologist named Brian Swim, and he wrote a book called The Universe Story. And so now that's what he got his PhD in, was mathematical cosmology. I mean, he knows the math of everything. He teaches, I think, UC Berkeley. I think maybe, please, people correct me if I'm wrong on that. But the way he wrote this book, it's the lifespan of the universe. He talks about the how the universe was born with the Big Bang, and how things just grew from plasma to organisms to solids to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all the way to where we're at now. But he calls it the universe story because he writes the whole book with mathematical principles, but from the context of the universe as a character. So he
Cool.
writes it in a universe, like in a story format.
Yeah.
And it's such a good book. I recommend it to anybody that I possibly can, because we can all sit there and think in our minds, yeah, okay, Big Bang, universe expanded, whatever, but we don't really get the science behind it. And he wrote the story of that in such a way that we could get it, because like that's how we understand things, is through story. We don't understand things normally through memorization or facts or whatnot. And he has kind of a parable in the very beginning where he talks about how the TV or the internet or whatever of the human being for hundreds of millions of years, if you believe in evolution, which I hope you do, um, that our TV and internet was basically the campfire and the stars, right? That is where we got all information and what happens around a campfire, but stories. So we had our whole matrix for hundreds of millions of years of how we grew as a species was getting information delivered to us through drama, through mythology, and there were facts behind it all, but in the sense that people were observing things and they were trying to figure things out, but that's how it was delivered to the populace, was in that context. And I think that that's just like we're in that pattern, right? Like that's in our DNA, that won't get out. So, which is
Hmm.
why I think it's so important that, if anybody is reading a book, they're 9 times out of 10, they're going to tell you the book that most impacted them in their life is a fiction book. The same with a movie over like a documentary, etc.
Yeah.
So, I do think that, we got to start leaning that way in order to convey information. And even though my comic Psychonaut Presents is very nonfiction, and that I'm just kind of retelling experiences that happened to me, my book Simon Myth Chronicles Broken Chalice is very much that. It is all of this esoteric knowledge that I've learned and uh, garnered over my lifetime. and I'm kind of channeling it all through there. But in the through the vehicle of a story, through the vehicle of these characters that have their own personalities and their own dramas and their own and hopefully then the information that I have to convey actually means something, rather than just like this is something that happened to me,
Yeah, yeah. So what
So,
is like the pitch of your fiction comics? Like what's the plot line or the log line?
oh man, why would you do that to me? This is the worst. This is the worst thing that I have going for myself. I'm not really good at that pitch. That so my fiction comic, Simon Myth Chronicles, centers around a character, Simon Myth, who's essentially a modern day wizard in a world where magic is like a thing. It's legalized. There's even a department of the government, the Department of Anomalous Affairs and Thaumaturgy, DAAT. That's dot for those Kabbalists out there, if you understand what that is. Um, and so he works for this department that kind of regulates magic, monitors magic practices across the spectrum across the US and the world, but also engages in like top secret CIA style projects, right? To see what they can do to kind of gain the upper hand. And it's based upon a paradigm of, in the world where kings and presidents have always had like magicians and sorcerers backing their power and doing all these things behind the scenes to get them, to have all these like kind of cold wars and power plays across the world map throughout history, which is based in part kind of on
Kind of.
reality.
Yeah, yeah.
Queen Elizabeth had John Dee. And there were other, emperors that and kings or queens that always had like astrologers, when we think, okay, an astrologer, a person that was just telling their horoscope, that's not what an astrologer was. They were essentially a sorcerer. They knew alchemy, and they were helping the king and queen to decide how to lead their kingdom. And this goes all the way back to like our tribal makeup, right? This goes all the way back to what shamans were. That's what the chiefs of the community would go to the shaman to figure out, when do we grow our crops? When do we harvest? Like, is it going to be we got a petition to you to make sure that we have a good harvest this season? So that's also has been kind of a part of our makeup, and the whole concept of the Simon Myth universe is like, well, what if that was just a reality at how our reality is now, and but it was just overt, it was out there. It wasn't this like
Yeah,
secret
everybody knew what was
society.
going
And
on.
so that's the essential concept of the Simon Myth universe. And the specific story is that the department that he works for initiated a top secret project that somehow kind of broke reality. And the whole series starts with, because that they broke reality, there's all of these anomalies that keep cropping up in the area wherever they perform their experiment. So, like, time will shift, or, people will start falling through the ground as if they're like, or falling through the walls like they're sinking in quicksand or something. The physics of reality is just all messed up, and his job is to go in and kind of fix all that. And the series kind of kicks off where he's doing that, and then something happens. Somebody from the past shows up that he relates to. You'll have to like read the series. I don't want
Yeah,
to.
yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
think I get the gist
but
of it.
something crops up to kind of spearhead a whole other adventure that gets like his whole crew together, the people that were part of the experiment, to kind of figure out what's going on. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of stuff in that series that is based upon my own, research, my own particular spiritual practices, and I've got so much planned for it. I mean, this series is going to last a long time, and my goal, I'm actually working on a prequel novel for it right now. As well. So it's going to be in both comic and, prose format. Just a lot of fun stuff.
So how many comics are like printed and published now?
So for my Simon Myth Chronicles, Broken Chalice, as well as my Psychonaut Presents comic, which is my more nonfiction memoir, So far, I have four issues each of each
Okay.
series, and that's what my crowdfunder is about. Is now I've got issue five of both series complete, and my crowdfunder is just kind of giving an opportunity for people to kind of jump on board to like what I have going on here. I've got five issues complete of each series. You can start one series or the other or both, or you can just get issue five of each one, and just kind of explore what I've got going on there. So I thought five was like a pretty good milestone. That's a
No, yeah. Are you releasing them all as like the floppy comics, or do you have trades of each title, like
so
graphic novels?
For Simon Myth Chronicles, I've not collected that yet. So it'll all be in floppies. So I'll have different reward tiers of you being able to get the number five issue, or you'll get like the entire collection if you want in floppies. Psychonaut Presents, you have two options. I do have floppies, but issues one through four I had collected into a single volume, which has extra content like pinups from different indie creators and whatnot. You have the option of like doing one of those as well. Like you can just get the floppies, or you can get, just the trade paperback with the new issue as well. So it worked out with Psychonaut Presents that I was able to kind of complete a chapter for myself with those first four issues. And now I'm kind of starting a new one with issue five. But with Simon Myth Chronicles, this initial story is about 7 to 8 issues long so far. So it's going to be a while
Okay.
before I can collect that. I'm going to try to I think I'll be able to wrap up the story in the next couple issues. I originally had it planned at eight, but I'm trying to find a way to kind of make it work for the next two issues and see if I can get it out a little
Collected
bit
at
sooner.
7 or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
That's that's cool. Okay. I'll get the links in the description and stuff so that people can go to that uh whenever they watch this.
Yeah, thank you.
Um now I'll go to sort of more of the fun parts. So what are I there's so much to ask about the actual journeys that you've gone with the psychedelic journeys, I guess, but I always kind of wonder in general, because I don't have really any experience with that realm. But I know, for example, that there's the ayahuasca kind of journeys that people will take. In the sense, for people that I don't understand, it's drank for the most part. It's a psychedelic drug that lasts for, I want to say, 24 hours or something like that. You usually do it with a legitimate shaman in South America or Central America. Were you saying you went to Peru? Is that right? Is
Yeah.
that what you did, was an ayahuasca, or what did you do in Peru?
So I have experience in two different what we call entheogenic substances, psychedelic medicines, whatever you want to call it. And my primary experience is with San Pedro, which is a kind of a masculine sort of like peyote, but grown in Peru, in the Andes of Peru. And the other is, yes, ayahuasca, which is grown in the jungles of Peru. And so my issues of Psychonaut Presents, issues one through four, detail two ritual experiences I had with shamans that were experienced in those particular lineages. And issue one of Psychonaut Presents highlights my ayahuasca experience. So it's a self-contained story in and of itself, outlining what I went through in a very intense ayahuasca experience where I just, you feel the death and the rebirth and the whole goal of that sort of experience is to sort of rewire the brain, rewire the ego so you can kind of self-reflect and take a look at your life and kind of dig in deep into the subconscious and allow you to kind of make changes, to better yourself. And that's the whole point of the ayahuasquero, the facilitator. Um, that's what they should be trying to do the whole time is kind of, facilitating this space for you to kind of move through traumas, old wounds, or habits, things that are kind of preventing you from being able to just fully walk your path, your reason for living. And it's very intense. And yeah, it kind of depends on the dosage that the ayahuasca feels like is important to you. Mine did last, a good, it was somewhere around 12 to 24 hours. Um, for some people, it can be multiple days, right? You'll have to go back and take multiple, dosages for multiple days, and it can be just a really, really intense experience. And so issues 2 through 4 of Psychonaut Presents details my experience with a curandero in the San Pedro lineage of Peru. And that actually is a little bit different because in that particular lineage, I was actually receiving some training because I was very interested in kind of figuring out what this was about and being able to help people. And the San Pedro medicine I loved way more because it's not as intense as the ayahuasca, although it can be if you allow it. It can get that intense, but it's very easy for that medicine for you to be able to be very in tune with reality and very in tune with what's going on with around you. So that particular story lasts about 3 issues because it dealt with a very long night in my life, which was basically an initiatory rites of passage. Because one thing that we don't get in this modern world is men very rarely get a rites of passage into manhood from boyhood,
Hmm.
There are organizations out there that try to do that, and are trying to kind of facilitate that paradigm. And, people and psychologists, researchers, um, sociological researchers, anthropologists are all just, starting to kind of understand that's one thing that lacks in our modern world that prevents, people in particular from being able to kind of grow up and be their own people and not succumb to, all the frailties of existence that cause like, mass mental illness, depression, mass shootings, all this stuff that we just consumes us in the news all the time. And my whole goal in life was to kind of like, well, what can I change in myself first, So yeah, the particular Curandero in that series of comics, issues 2 through 4 of Psychonaut Presents, is a person that I trained with. His name happened to also be Don Daniel, and trained in a Peruvian lineage that focuses on the San Pedro cactus itself, and which is a lineage that dates like 3,000 years into the past. You can find traces of that particular lineage in the highlands of Peru that predate the Incas and the Moche and etc. And I found a lot of connection with that particular work myself. Ayahuasca was like really intense. I don't think I could ever approach that. If I ever approached it again, it would have to be very carefully.
Yeah.
But the San Pedro work was great because there was a lot of close interaction with the people that imbibe the medicine with the curandero. With ayahuasca, you're kind of just laid out, and there's very little that happens with the ayahuasca facilitator who's mostly setting the space. They might do a little bit of healing work or whatnot, but the San Pedro work, there's a lot of interaction. There's a lot of what they call limpias or raisings, things to kind of like strip away old habits and old energies in the body and to like do all this stuff to you to kind of like facilitate a new you and to, raise your body and raise your vibration up sort of thing. And I mean, I'm not like too woo-woo of a person. A lot of this for me is, very psychosomatic and I appreciate that aspect of it is like, is it real? Is it not real? I don't know. I don't really care other than that it really worked for me. I really resonated with it and enjoyed those experiences. So
Yeah, that's where I was going to go with it. For example, I was listening to a podcast, the Radio Lab. Do you know Radio Lab or ever heard of that?
I know of
Like
it.
it's
I
the
think I've listened to it
indie.
a couple times, but
Okay, yeah,
not often.
they consider themselves, scientists that are like kind of science entertainers. and they mostly just interview and do these sort of audio documentaries on this particular subjects, and they never go woo woo with anything really. And but one that really like caught me off guard a few years back was they did one on, I forget what it was about really, but one of the discoveries was basically that acupuncture is real, or like that it was sort of in the West considered a sort of pseudoscience for a long time. And then there was a discovery of something called the interstitium, like another circulatory system that was similar to our bloodstream that had this sort of fluid that was going all throughout our bodies. And then when they mapped that, it perfectly mapped the like acupuncture maps of, and I remember thinking like, oh man, like this could directly correlate to a lot of like ancient sort of pseudoscience, or what they consider sort of pseudoscience here in the West, on a more practical level of like, oh, there's maybe if they're mapping, for example, chakras, those are still kind of a commonly understood thing, but I don't think that even I understand sort of what it really means in the way that someone that's a lot more in the woo-woo sense of mapping sort of the spiritual realms. And
Yeah,
that's where I was getting to sort of like uh I say where I was. In my head, I am going a lot of different directions, but it's like with the you're doing these sort of you're working with shamans. Let's just say they're sort of experts in their psychedelic spiritual healing, and they, in a sense, I view it kind of like that, to where they have a map of what you might call we see as invisible, but they know how certain chemicals mix with each other internally and how they can mix tobacco and whatever, and have you lay down and take deep breath. I don't know exactly, but it's like they have some kind of framework that's
hmm,
based upon their own science in some way.
yeah,
And it's like if there's other ones that were considered sort of fake and like but they're coming real, and you have real experiences and plenty of others. I guess sort of my question for you is like, what have you come out of these healings and journeys to where, for example, if it's like the black box scenario where you have something going on, you go into the black box and take one of these treatments. When you step out of the box, what physically can you say like, I had a stutter and now it's gone. I had sort of issues aside from just sort of internal, trauma or something like that, but more of like I am like clearly objectively changed, even if not just from one experience, but like what's kind of the most full arc that you've gone through that you can walk us through if it's not told in your stories?
sure. Um, so the most tangible changes that have resulted in my work with this like ritual work with these people is I mean, I went into the work with a diagnosis of PTSD. Um, I could barely, like, there's no way I would have been able to have this conversation. I would just be vomiting the whole time. I could barely
Oh,
even get up in front of people to talk. I couldn't like shake someone's hand, let alone a hug. And seeing as how I was a young father, and I got PTSD through an event I don't really care to recount, but
yeah, no need.
it was an intense, violent, horrible experience. And um, I was a young father at the time, and I was just like, I got to do this for my kid if I'm not going to do it for myself. I've got to be able to be a person that can love, express love, and that my child can connect with, and that I can interact with without being filled with constant anxiety and crippling anxiety. So coming out of that. 100%. I mean, I can facilitate in front of 200 people, no problem, and not break a sweat. It's not like an issue for me. I hug and kiss everybody in my family. I can just like it's not an issue for me now to interact with people. So I was definitely able to come out of it through that work with um, an experience of myself and being able to kind of understand who I am and be able to interact with the world in a way that wasn't going to handicap me so I could operate and do what I need to do. Um, that's probably like the most, I think, tangible thing for me that
Yeah.
worked. But at the same time, I still feel those things, right? Like, which is why it's important to find, a curandero or ayahuasquero or shaman or whoever the hell you're working with, someone that's like legit able to kind of help walk you through, like, yeah, great, you can take this stuff, but you're not just going to come out of it a whole new person and some kind of luminous being and floating on, like, you're still a human being who's going to
Yeah.
go out into the world, and your needs are that you're going to have to shit and make love and eat and like the no, you're a human being,
Yeah.
and so like you're still going to experience anxieties and fear. Like that stuff doesn't go away. So when people recount experiences with these substances where they feel like that they have completely changed, and especially when they kind of walk out of it with this like high horse and like, well, now I'm suddenly channeling the Pleiadians and I have a message for humanity.
Yeah.
Like, I have a lot of reticence towards that. I mean, to each their own. If that's like I'm not, if that's a legit thing that's happening for them, great. But my experience, and when I recount my research into these fields, like if you look on my bookshelf, not this bookshelf, these are all my comics, but my other bookshelf, all of my research into these areas are anthropological studies. They're not just like some kind of random book that you get off of Barnes and Noble. Like, and so whenever you go into the research of how these substances have actually worked to help people, it's like that. It is people that have kind of it's helped them move through something, but you still have to go out into the world and do the work. You still have to be a human being and operate. There's very few experiences where somebody just walks out and is like, I never had this addiction ever again in my life. And like I've read that in a few very popular books and accounts, but nothing that's tied to an actual study that's been done. And those are the aspects that I was very interested in. I was very lucky. I was able to kind of get into a community of people via through Douglas Sharon and Bonnie Glass Kaufman. They're PhDs that anthropologists that are very in tune with a lot of the indigenous communities in Peru, and they work with them very closely and bring all that information forward into an academic standpoint so we can really truly begin to kind of like measure how these experiences, not just the substances, but the ritual experiences themselves work for people, and how it kind of works not just from a psychological standpoint, but from a community standpoint, as well,
Yeah.
which is very important. It's something that we've lost. So um, I hope I answered your question.
No, yeah, for sure. I could be way off, but almost see it as sort of a in the same way that someone might get out of training in a martial art or something, to where it takes a
Yes.
lot of work and it's not like you get to the finish line and now I can, fight everybody or something like that. It's like it's a tangible accomplishment to you,
Yep.
and it's also to other people observable. Um, but it's just not so substantial to where you might consider it just like I had a problem and now I'm cured. It's
Yeah.
more like it's a sort of a lifestyle change or sort of something like that.
Yeah. I know how to work with the problem.
Yeah. Okay.
I know how to manage it and to, so, but I'm not walking around with a crystal tied to my head, and, it's, it, I hope I'm not sounding demeaning to any
No.
people out there in communities. It's just, I do get frustrated the way that psychedelic medicines are often portrayed, and the spiritual angle of it gets portrayed, because in reality, like the curanderos that I've met, these aren't woo-woo people. These are people that like during the day, they're a plumber or
Hmm.
or a cook or whatever. That's just, and they live in a shack, they're not like making money and they're just ordinary average people, and when you go to the ritual space it's like a little corner behind their washer and dryer or something, behind their house. Like it's like they're just like, okay, then let's do the work. Like for them it's like just an everyday thing that doesn't have to be this like grandiose like woo woo, Instagram reel or something. It's just a
No.
real part of life and just like getting through life, and that you do it and then you move on, and then you like, and they're looking forward to just like watching the soccer game the next morning, like that's like what they're like, they're
No,
just like,
that
you
brings me
know
to I guess you could say my experience with this thing from a cultural aspect. I've done a decent amount of traveling, and I noticed that exact thing, like you're saying, is that for people that I mean, you could even think about it in like even Western or just world religions, like Christianity or something. It's like we're it's there's almost everybody believes in sort of supernatural stuff, and that there's things like miracles and that there's things like magic. Um, and even to an extent, a lot of people believe in things like, their government is lying to them. And so, and I used to work in Yellowstone National Park, and Yellowstone's known for a lot of things. One of them, and people that go online, is ghosts and ghost stories. There's a lot of history in these places, and also people going missing and UFOs and things like that. And I've
yeah,
like people I've worked with see ghosts, see UFOs. I myself, have had experiences, but at the end of it, it's like everybody, and even people I know who have channeled beings and or say they have or feel as if they've talked to angels and demons and things like that. When it comes out of it, it's like at the end of the day, even the people that it's a part of their life, like you're saying, plumbers that then just do the work for of healing somebody, and it's like they're making money off of this. And even if they heal somebody of a very tangible thing, for example, they have cuts that healed faster than should or something like that, they just kind of are just, okay, on to the next. It's never really that like, oh my goodness, this changes everything about our lives. And it's like, in the next moment, we're just back to being like, you know what I really care about? Whatever I'm about to eat, wherever
yeah,
my kids are at. It's like no matter what, we're always just come back to we're just living this human experience. And even in these kind of extra dimensional spiritual realms, it's as if these, even at the greater spectrum, it's the same thing to where it's just sort of nothing's that like crazy. And kind of what I was getting to is like with these comics and stuff, it's a grand adventure where essentially people are wizards. But whenever you're living that day to day, even you believe these things and they're really happening, life's really not that different. Like
yeah,
it's really and that's why I like thinking about these things from a fictional level, even like science fiction. It's like, yes, we are going the route to where people are sort of becoming cyborgs kind of thing. And it's like, what will life be like in that reality? Not that different from what things are like now, and all over the world, there's different people that are culturally living completely seemingly different lives, but we're all just sort of functioning together, and there's never big aha moment of, oh, that person can, like, I guess to sum it down to like one thing, it's like if I see somebody floating, and they're just floating around a hotel, and then they sit down and then they're just like, now I just want to go sit in my room. It's like, how does it change me? It doesn't change much. It's like, okay, well, the guy was floating or the guy teleported to a room. What are you going to do? You're going to tell somebody? They're living their life with that reality. And even if it's shocking to me, and even if other people believed it, it's like, it doesn't change much because at the core of it, the person is still just trying to get into their room. They're not like
yeah,
overthrowing the world or
right,
suddenly being like, now that I have some kind of supernatural power, I'm gonna kill everybody or something. It's like there's
Right.
nothing really like that that's seemingly going on.
Yeah.
Uh, and so yeah, it's just interesting. It's just like my kind of come to is no matter where things go and the more we learn, it's kind of like we've been living in these realities all along. And we're just more now starting to realize, oh, there's actually more to that thing that seemed more just kind of weird or miraculous. It's like, oh, this actually makes sense now. It's a part of our day to day. It's in our textbooks of this is how it works. And it's not that big. Oh, this revelation of now the big thing is um, whatever you call it, where you can hear people's thoughts or telepathy, the
Just
telepathy
telepathy.
tapes. Um, and it's just like, yeah, so now that it's like, okay, so what are you gonna do now that you can read people's thoughts? It's not like it changes everything. The whole structure of the universe changes. It's just like, well, now, someone might know your thoughts. It's not that
Yeah.
crazy or weird, and um I could talk about this kind of stuff forever, but
No, yeah, I think you're right on in that. I mean, that's kind of where I went with the my Simon Myth Chronicles angle is that this aspect of reality is kind of just always existed. Like for some reason, we just somewhere around like the age of reason, like the 17th century going into 18th century, we started kind of cutting it all off, I guess, and the Industrial Revolution happened, and there was this, if you like read like literature from that era, there's this like disparity between understanding the romantic nature of reality, the supernatural nature of reality, and just everything going down to science and reason and technology and
yeah.
whereas before all of that, like well before all that, those things were all just kind of one and the same. They were intermingled. It was just kind of a part of reality. It wasn't this, we're constantly in this state where people are like, oh, UFOs might be real. What? Or this might like, but back then it was just that stuff happened and it was just a part of everything. And so, yeah, I think we're just kind of in this weird, like, reawakening stage, which doesn't mean like everybody's becoming enlightened or whatnot.
Yeah.
I think we're just starting to realize going back to the Graham Hancock thing, because you mentioned him, the reason why I love his work so much is because he really cements the notion of history isn't just that we were just cave people that like, were dumb and with that Neanderthal mindset, and we've slowly just progressed to some kind of enlightened intelligence that we actually had civilizations that were intelligent and had technologies and had things, and then disasters happen in the world and cycles in the world happen, and we're starting to find traces of those early civilizations that like, oh, at one point in time, humanity was an advanced civilization. Something happened and we kind of, we lost all that knowledge. Which is actually just very poignant to like what's happening in the world today or happening even in American culture of like knowledge and preserving knowledge is very important because it can be lost and human
Yeah.
beings can regress. History can regress. It's not just this steady progression of intelligence like accelerating. It's just things shift and there are cycles, and sometimes we collectively forget, who we are, or forget, all the things that we've learned, and we go into a dark age, the dark ages, and then we
Yeah,
have to
yeah.
climb out of that again. And so, yeah, that's why I think Graham Hancock is really important.
Yeah,
Whether
man, yeah.
people believe with all his summations or not, like the concept of that is that there's enough evidence to suggest that there were advanced civilizations beyond what normal history tells us. And they had ways of being able to do things that we can't account for today. And that's like, okay, it doesn't have to be this world shattering thing. It's like, oh,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, that's how I have always seen it. Is like it doesn't seem like that's the fringe idea. It seems
Right.
more as if stable, like keeping it to the way it's in history books seems the more outrageous. Like it
Yeah.
makes more sense that we really don't know what the heck happened. Like,
Yep.
and that it's probably a lot older than that, and that we have had huge rises and falls over across a long, long period of time. And I mean, we forget things that happen but in our own lifetimes. Like I was just trying to figure out sort of like my great grandparents, and it's like I don't know anything like just two or three generations out of like what was going on. Like what makes us think any of this makes sense? And then just looking back at like early America, or kind of just how little we actually know about what was going on. It's like we don't even remember what things were really happening. Or I say we, it's just as if they're like the way it's collected and written, as if like this is what happened in 2020 and this is what happened in 2004. And it's like that collective into one sentence is wrong almost every time, because it's like,
Yeah.
in those of us who've lived through it, it is as if a lot of us just seem to not remember or not care. And it's like, no, that's not how it happened. It's like, if you remember, there's huge controversy over like everything major that happened from,
Right.
like in my lifetime, the big conspiracy, even whenever I was a kid, was 9/11. Of my
Hmm.
parents' generation, the big conspiracy was JFK.
Yep.
Of like their generation before that, it's like probably, there was plenty, but it's almost like kind of these big major events, and those are just the sort of obviously controversial. There is plenty of other stuff that people remember as non-controversial, but in reality they were, or that
Right.
just not everybody saw things in the same realm. And it's just like you keep going back and back and back. It's like, of course, we don't even know really what happened that created the founding of the country. And then, like, of course, what happened thousands of years ago. And it's like, it wouldn't be that crazy to think that, it's like there were actual species that existed that don't anymore, things that went extinct, that we humans also lived at the same time of. It's like, so kind of just the idea of people living with real life monsters,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, that is not a weird supernatural thing. And even now, it's like for people to say, like, oh, we had monsters. It's like we're living with alligators, we're living with bears.
Yep.
And to this day, the indigenous are living with everything in the jungle and don't have weapons, like, and like it's just like some of the more extreme, the more fantasy, the fun parts. Why I say it's like fun to talk about this is like, if you go back far enough in time, the idea of something like Lord of the Rings, or to where it's like we have basically giant people, dwarves. It's like that is not that much of a stretch, even to extend to something like ogres or something like you're talking about, like evolution. It's like if something is like more self trying to, I guess more fearful, and like like evolves living in the dark and hardened. It's like there's certain species that could, like it's not that much of a stretch. To me, it seems like that's not the weird thing. The idea
Yeah.
that a long, long time ago things were very different, and we may have lived with, we know in the written history that, like you were saying, magic, or the idea of like these esoteric concepts were common amongst everybody. The idea that kings and queens consulted oracles and had their, what would Rasputin's role, and like just all this kind of stuff. It's like that's probably still going on to today,
Right.
and it's always been like, so there's probably stuff that we're just sort of not looking at in the same light, because we're just sort of, we're just, yeah, something happened, whatever you're saying, like around the Industrial Revolution, to where everybody just was like, this is material science, everything else is woo woo. To me, it's like that has never really been that strange, or like it's just like kind of, especially like just the fact that things could be older, or that we may have like, survived past, especially since so much of what we know, or like what we read, talks about floods of the past. It
Right.
seems like,
Yeah.
yeah, like there probably was one, and we were, and a lot of us died. Like it seems to just make sense.
that's important that you bring up Rasputin because that was not that long ago.
No,
That,
exactly.
that was
Yeah,
not,
two or
that
three
was
generations
basically
ago.
yesterday. I mean, just because when we see pictures of him, it's a black and white photo, that was pretty much yesterday. Like, there
He
are
would still be
people,
alive, maybe, if he didn't die.
well,
He
there are
would,
people alive that certainly were alive when he was.
yeah,
And
exactly.
so, like, why do we think that that is something that's just isolated to those black and white photos? That is the disservice that mainstream history has in the way it's delivered to us, especially within our school systems. That's the disservice that it does to us, is it makes us compartmentalize notions as if they no longer exist, whereas
Yeah.
they really are still happening. Like why would we think that that's this isolated occurrence whenever, especially if you read into it, you can look into that that kind of stuff happened all the time and it's still happening in many contexts. I mean, look at CIA's MK Ultra and all the
Hmm.
other things that we've done to, like, even as a modern society, to explore, and push the envelope of reality in many different ways. Um, so yeah, I just that's the I mean I say mainstream history. There are historians out there. There are hardcore scholars out there in universities that understand the fluidity of history. They understand that everything isn't just broken down into names and dates and that's how everything just gets categorized. They understand that that's just a framework to be able to
Hmm.
kind of maneuver around in our brains, but really history is 100% subjective because, as you said, for every event that happens, there are a multitude of perspectives that went into that, into understanding how that event happened, what that event actually meant. And I appreciate that there are many different branches of history, of historians out there that are trying to more closely understand what history means from a political standpoint, from a sociological standpoint, from a psychological, cultural standpoint, because that's actually where history has its meets the metal, right? That's where the rubber
Yeah.
really hits the road. That's why I really appreciate anthropology, because anthropology tries to understand cultural practices from the standpoint of what it means to be human, a human being with a psychology and that has relationships and interactions with the self and the other. And anthropology seeks to, like, really break that down and understand that. So, in another life, I really could have been an anthropologist. I think I would.
Yeah,
Maybe still, who knows?
that that's funny. I never really realized how much anthropology really studied. I guess I thought it's just sort of study of indigenous cultures. I guess whenever you get into it, or it's a
It's all human.
whole
It's all
super
human
science.
society. There are whole schools of anthropology that are the anthropology of now, the
Wow, I didn't
modern
even
world.
think about it like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
in industrial anthropology, I mean, like and how, like, and the industrial revolution and the industrial matrix of society, how it impacts being a human being, how it impacts how we have relationships and how culture has been impacted. It's really fascinating.
yeah,
I love it. And so yeah, it just again, it's like we're kind of taught a way to where we're kind of taught a term and we compartmentalize it into a specific, like, filing folder in our brains. But a lot of these disciplines, whether it's anthropology or politics or magic,
yeah,
they all actually, like, they all cross pollinate, within our consciousness. And they're all part of the bigger spectrum and the bigger thing. And I think that, to get back to our original point regarding story
yeah,
in fiction, I think that's why fiction is important, because when something's delivered in a nonfiction way, we tend to compartmentalize it as, oh, this is that category of nonfiction. I can stick this in that particular Wikipedia page in my mind.
hmm,
Whereas fiction pushes it into the soul, fiction really reaches into the human being and through story is able to deliver information to where not only are you just like given facts, but like you're living that information, you're experiencing that information, and you understand the context of the experiences to the person's mind, to the person's relationships, um, etc. So, um, yeah, I applaud anybody who writes fiction who's really approaching it from that angle, who understands what they're doing. You know, people like, well, like Alan Moore, but to go to other like fiction authors like Thomas Pynchon is one, David Foster Wallace. I think a lot of the Beat uh, people, the Beat generation in the mid-century really understood that. Early science fiction authors really understood that. Most early science fiction authors were scientists that were,
Huh.
Isaac
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Asimov and
Yeah,
others. They
yeah,
were
as
like
well. Yeah.
they were trying to like help people understand like where we were at on the threshold of knowledge and the potential that was ahead of us, you know. So I think
Hmm.
Cormac McCarthy is another one. Cormac McCarthy is a person that really helps us understand where the negativity side of human experience will take us, in a real way. He doesn't just like write these stories that's like, oh, it's just like a pulp story, whatever. It doesn't mean anything. Like he's really trying to help us understand, man, if society falls apart, like this is the undercurrent, right? This is the deep great below of like where human nature can take us, you know. So there's immense power in storytelling and in the fiction word if it's done correctly, for sure.
Oh yeah, it's yeah, kind of to wrap it all in a bow where we were talking about at the beginning. It's like that is the key to it all. Is like we are addicted to stories, and that's what really gets things drilled into our psyche. And yeah, I think I've used this example in like some of my other videos, but it's like if you think about a story of something as simple as like Bates Motel, um, and it's like it's just a small town and a like a traumatic family experience, and then you just sort of level it up to an extreme. But the key part is like what makes it so like addictive is like you're just putting it into something with a common theme and a common tone, and you're like putting a color grade on it, and you're adding ambience to it. um it's like the story itself and the things that happen, it's just like you just take real life, put it at 10, and then just consolidate it into a theme tone that you like, or that you're trying to like, or whatever. And there's something about that to where it's just like we're just trying to just like go into this world, and it's like, but that world is not, it doesn't have to be super fantasy or anything. It's the same world we're living in.
Yeah.
It's the same small town. It's just that it's just leveled up to 10, and you're going in a direction that it's like it feels good, even though in the example of Bates Motel, it's like it's a dark plot line, it doesn't feel good, but for some reason it's fun,
Yeah.
it's like thrilling because of the different what I would almost think of it as story is like magic going into it. Is like
Yeah.
you're just putting these filters onto the reality that you're watching as if you're living it, and it can be. Anyway, yeah, we could talk
Yeah.
about this forever. What's your links and stuff? Where should I send people to?
Yeah, so my website is danielmoellerweb.com. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook and stuff, but my crowdfunder page where I'm trying to like put all this out is crowdfunder at, well, you got me. Psychonaut 5. Crowdfunder.com/psychonaut 5 is
Okay, but if
where
they go to your danielmoellerweb.com, is it like on the homepage or
it's
something, the
right
link
there. It's
there?
right on the homepage. You can get
Okay,
right.
I'll
You
send
can,
people there. It's
yep.
Daniel Moeller, spelled Moler, danielmoellerweb.com. Cool.
Yep. Yeah, that's where you can find me. And I mean, I'm always putting out stuff. I put out a couple of works a year at least. This year I've had quite a few more than a couple because I'm an empty nester now, so I'm going to be putting out a lot more in the near future. So stay tuned.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll do this again in a year or so if you got more to update on.
I would love to talk to you, man. We'll have to get together outside of this. You're a fun guy to talk to.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, yeah. Off screen, yeah, I could talk much deeper down these rabbit holes. But yeah,
Yep.
this has been awesome. I definitely look forward to our next conversation. So I'll wrap it up there.